The museum buff system has been in Rise of Kingdoms for a fair while now, but no one has made a really good guide breaking down all of the different buffs and what you should potentially be investing your hard-earned exhibit and relic coins for. So today, we're going to call out the best museum buffs in Rise of Kingdoms and the ones you might want to consider skipping. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Shappy. I'm a sponsored Rise of Kingdoms content creator, and today we are going to be talking all about the museum buff system in Rise of Kingdoms. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the museum buff system, let's break it down. The museum is unlocked at the end of the off-season before Season 3, and unlock exhibits in the museum to purchase relics. So you need to be able to unlock them using the exhibit coins in order to then purchase the relics. Now, all of these things give you particular buffs on commanders that you've already invested in. So the reason they introduced this system was actually originally because of the fact that many people would invest in these commanders in KVK 1 and KVK 2, and then you'd hit Season 3, and they're no longer all that viable. And they've made some changes to try and make this a little bit easier. They've introduced the commander swap system, which if you're unfamiliar with that, I'll link it on the top right side of your screen. You will also be able to use a commander swap. So you probably want to be a little bit tactical about how you invest in museum buffs versus investing in swaps. Now, for the museum buff, different commanders got different buffs, and candidly, some of them were better than others. So there are buffs for just about every Gold Geek commander, as well as there are buffs for some of the commanders that are a little bit more viable. So you've got Ramses in here. He's got a museum buff. You got Artemisia. She's got a museum buff. Theodora, YSS, Siaj Kaak, Chandra Gupta, and even William. Now, William is a good one because if you invested in him in the early game, he's still viable if you're using combo formation behind Arthur. So you can run Arthur William and do really, really well. YSS is another great one. If you have him maxed to protect your city, you're going to want to use him. So there are a lot of really good commanders here. And what I would tend to remind you is the museum buff is really only going to be valuable if those commanders are going to be in your setup. So let's take a really good example here. So YSG. YSG is easily the most viable commander in Rise of Kingdoms from KVK 1 all the way into Season of Conquest. You can still use YSG in your March if you're running 2 Archer commanders today. So investing in the YSG relic makes a lot of sense. Now, the other reason why the YSG relic is particularly good is because he has skill damage bonus of 12% and archer defense of 20%. which him as a commander is severely lacking. So investing in this is really going to be worth it for you as you try to figure out who you should be investing in. Again, you want to make sure that you're investing in commanders that you're still going to be using in one way or another. And on that note, one of the commanders that I've invested in is Cao Cao. And you may be wondering, Shappy, what are you thinking? Why are you investing in Cao Cao? And the answer is actually quite simple. When I rally barbarian forts, I use Cao Cao as my secondary commander. So as a consequence of that, I invested in his skill and it made sense. Now, one thing that you may want to keep in mind is that getting these exhibit coins and getting these relic coins is particularly difficult. And even more problematically is if you haven't yet unlocked a commander through the exhibit, it is going to be more expensive. So don't just unlock everyone, because once you unlock them, the next subsequent commander is going to be more expensive. So let's look at this as an example. I unlocked Julius Caesar. I'm probably never going to use his relic. He's got a great relic. The all damage bonus is amazing, especially in Sunset Canyon, but I've never used him. So I'm going to salvage this. And now you'll notice that if I go to unlock another commander, let's say Theodora, because I still use her in my city garrison. So let's go over here. We have Theodora right there. You'll notice the cost is now only 700 exhibit coins rather than the 900 that it was before. So you want to be very careful about which you unlock. And then once you unlock it, you can then buy the relic using those relic coins there. Now, getting these different coins and currencies is somewhat challenging, so just keep that in mind because there is a finite number of them. Now, there are a couple commanders you absolutely have to get the buffs for. The first of which is going to be Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, like YSG, is probably one of the best museum commanders in the game. So you want to make sure that you're unlocking his relic and getting it to the maximum level, because you can pair him with Luce and have Luce Alex as an amazing pair. And you want to make sure that you're using this if you're going to be running Alex. A couple other commanders that you might want to consider: Minamoto. Again, if you're going to be running Barbarian Forts, you probably want to get Minamoto's buff unlocked. He's actually pretty good with the buff as well, because he's got that extra 30% defense and extra 30% cavalry attack. That is statistically one of the best buffs that we've seen in this entire museum. But my favorite buff by far is going to be Charles Martel. Charles Martel got a buff of 50% attack and 10% health. And Charles Martel is still really useful in a number of different ways in the game. He has one of the highest counterattack damage stats of any commander. And if you're using him in a relic KVK, you can put him behind Attila to counter even ranged marches. That's right, you heard me. If a ranged march is sniping you, you can actually counter it with Martel Attila, because you deal that much more counterattack damage. So this is a must-have if you are going to be trying to be a little bit tankier, or if you need some of that counterattack damage boost. Another commander to not sleep on is going to be Richard. Now, the main value of Richard is actually going to be in Sunset Canyon. Realistically, you're not going to be using Richard in the field in the late game, but if you have him maxed, you do want to get his exhibition and museum buff as a consequence of him being used in Sunset Canyon. If you're not using him in Sunset Canyon, don't bother. And another commander that you probably want to make sure that you're unlocking the buff for is going to be Mehmed. Mehmed got one of the best buffs probably possible. He got 30% troop health and 10% skill damage. So you will often see Mehmed used with the likes of YSG or XY for combat, because he's got that health and he's got that skill damage boost, which makes him a perfect glass cannon commander. So this is another great buff that you're probably going to want to get. Now, the gross majority of the other commanders are probably not worth getting. I wouldn't get Attila, I wouldn't get Takeda unless you're really planning on using them in the field. Remember, these currencies are fairly hard to come by, so you want to be very careful about which commanders you're actually using these things on. I wouldn't use them on many of the other gold key commanders. You could do Constantine again. That's probably also going to be mainly for the Sunset Canyon lineup, but if you do have him maxed, you could unlock him as well. He's got a pretty good buff there. I wouldn't do Pyrrhus. I wouldn't do Leonidas. Probably wouldn't do Ramses. Archers are just not where it's at right now. YSS I might consider if you are running him as city garrison. Siege I wouldn't. William I probably would if you are running him in your lineup. Overall, museum buffs have not changed the meta in Rise of Kingdoms as much as I might have hoped, but let me know in the comment section below. Do you think that they are good enough, or should they be made even better? If you guys enjoyed, be sure to drop a like on this video and hit that subscribe button right over there, bottom right hand corner. Helps me out a ton, and make sure you don't miss any content that I release. Thank you all. Shappy out.